Hi, everyone. Okay, so we're going to have a little bit of a conversation on race. I wish we could have this in person because it's such an important conversation and it's a difficult one in an asynchronous environment where we can't have feedback and conversation back and forth. But we'll try to do the best that we can do. And then I have scheduled a Thursday office hour so we can have more personal conversations then, and we probably will have another office hour at the beginning of next week. So I want to get started picking up where we left off maybe last week in the Genesis and Abundant Life article. And just a reminder as we talk about these difficult topics, ethical issues, questions that are pressing in on us as a church or pressing in on us as a culture or both. The ultimate goal that we're looking for is, again, life and the kind of life that Jesus offers. So he defines that in some ways, specifically in some ways, and then generally in other ways that we can draw on from the scriptures. I take the law in the Old Testament as the boundaries around kind of in the impulses towards what it means to have life with God. And for Israel as a nation, this is important. When it comes to the church, there's a different kind of way that we live out our life, not in a nationalistic way, but in as a community among all of the nations. And so that's an important distinction, especially when we get to the area of politics, which overlays this area when we talk about race. So the goal is for everyone to experience the flourishing that God has designed for them as an image bearer of God's self. And so we looked at that in Genesis 1 and 2, and then we looked at how quickly that life gets corrupted by sin in Genesis 3. Then examples in Genesis 4, a brother kills a brother. In Genesis 6, God grieves that he created humanity because of the depth of their sinfulness and how pervasive it has become. And so the story of the Noahic flood. And then Genesis chapter 11, when humanity comes together and makes themselves out as God. Again, the idolatry related to the Tower of Babel. So illustrations of how deep sin runs in our personal lives and our cultural lives, within the systems and within the institutions of a particular community, whether that's a nation state, an empire, or a tribe, or something like that. And so in Genesis chapter 12 forward, Genesis switches from poetic language to historical language, and it's the beginning to call the people, the nation of Israel, through Abram, in order to form a people that's going to reflect what it means to live well in God's world. And so that project of the redemptive work of God, as we talked about, influences all areas of life. I want to talk a little bit about how we can label sin. I have conversations with a few folks that tend to be on the liberal side of Christianity, and veer towards their view of human nature is that humanity is created good, and sometimes sin. And I often kind of comment that sin is the most scientifically verifiable doctrine that we have in the scriptures, that it shows itself over and over and over again throughout history. And so I want to put a little sociological and historical language on this. And what I want to say is one of the ways that we sin against another is we create an other. And when we create an other, we tend to treat an other as less than ourselves and therefore less than human. And so I want to look at that in history, and then I want to look at it sociologically with some definitions in order to identify that and to be able to pinpoint it so that we can begin the process of the redemptive work of applying Christ's atonement to this. So I'm drawing from Christina Cleveland's book, Disunity in Christ, for some of these definitions. So I want to put a couple of them out here, and then I'll post the notes for you in the next to the lecture. So first of all, the cognitive miser effect. The cognitive miser effect is we tend to conserve our cognitive resources when we can. So how this plays out is we associate with people like us. We conserve our resources because at times we need them, and it causes mental anguish, mental distress, mental work. And so we tend to drift towards not doing that work if we can avoid it. So we tend to go to great lengths to avoid ambiguity. And depending on where you're at in the personality scales, you can live with a little more ambiguity than maybe other people, but we all tend to avoid ambiguity. We want cognitive closure. The second definition is the outgroup homogeneity effect. So this is when we say our in-group is unique and the other, whatever group that is, the outsiders, are all the same. So we're unique and outsiders are all the same. This coupled with the gold standard effect, that we are better than them. And so we measure our strengths versus their weaknesses. So oftentimes this plays out in the sense that because we think we're strong, we're valuable, and the other is weak and they have these negative attributes, then we think that we should have power and privilege. And I'm just saying we as a corporate we in whatever group that you might be in. So this becomes especially nefarious when it becomes a background framework and it goes unnamed, which we'll look at when we talk about the social construction of race in the 15th century, the 1400s. Prejudice is the next definition. Prejudice, this is from my friend Reggie Williams, for those of you who read Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus. When you have proximity without relationship, and you begin to form overgeneralized opinions about an outgroup that shape the basis for judging them as less than yourselves. So you combine the outgroup homogeneity effect, they are the same, coupled with the gold standard effect, we are unique and different, and you begin to develop prejudices against the outgroup. The next definition is group polarization. In the absence of diverse influences, a homogeneous group members tend to adopt more extreme and narrow-minded views as time passes. Another word for this is confirmation bias. Over time, our convictions calcify and our attitudes towards different ideas and cultural expressions of things like worship, or in the Christian term, or just cultural expressions of different things become more negative. Confirmation bias, what happens with that is we begin to associate with people who are like us, the cognitive miser effect. We begin to judge people as less than us, the outgroup homogeneity effect and the gold standard effect. We develop prejudices against them, so we tend to then just continue in our in-groups, and then we stop thinking because the people in our in-group confirm our biases and they confirm the things that we think about, so we stop thinking about those. That's why I talked about you need a diverse community for a proper scriptural interpretation to avoid the confirmation bias. Okay, the next definition is discrimination. When you make decisions about the distribution of goods in society based on superficial characteristics or prejudices against a group. And then finally, racism. When one in-group is defined by its outward characteristics, say their color of skin, hair texture, facial or body features, their location, etc., and they specifically choose to measure all other identities by an idealized standard. And in the West, in this race conversation, this standard is whiteness. We'll talk a little bit more about that specific idea in a little bit. Then you set up a system and a structure that institutionalizes that standard in order to maintain power and privilege. If you think you're the ideal version of humanity and others don't measure up, but even in your altruism or your virtue, you want to give them something so that they can measure up to you, that you set up a system that will do that, and that system becomes racist. So let's stop there, and then I'll jump to some historical examples in the next lecture.